I'm huge on repurposing of content. Most people don't get nearly the value they should out of the content they create. But every blog post I write is not only going to be a blog post that is evergreen and can be used, whatever, the underlying ideas, the quote unquote intellectual property within that blog post, I'm going to leverage in all sorts of different ways.
Hey guys, this is Chikodi, host of the Creator Business Show. Today, we are talking to Josh Spector. He's a consultant who works with creators. He helps them identify their audience and he helps them monetize. We're going to talk about how you eliminate distraction, how you eliminate spreading yourself too thin to make sure that you're talking to the people who need you. And we're also going to talk about how you present your transformation. A lot of great content. So I'm really excited to dive in. Thank you for joining us on today's episode of the Creator Business Show. Hello and welcome to another edition of the Creator Business Show. My name is Chikodi Chima and I am honored today to be joined by Josh Spector from joshspector.com. It's a pleasure to be here with you today. Josh, do you want to tell us a little bit about who you are and what you do?
Sure. First of all, thanks for having me. So I am a audience growth strategist, consultant, and newsletter creator. I run the For the Interested newsletter, which I have for a little over 5 years now. It comes out every Sunday, and then I have a one paragraph daily weekday edition as well. It is designed to basically help creators produce, promote, and profit from their creations. It's a combination of usually one original article a week that I write, as well as curated articles and videos and podcasts from other people. And then, in addition to that, in terms of how I generate revenue, there are ads in the newsletter. That's one revenue stream. I work as a consultant is probably my main revenue stream. I sell some info products, and I have a. It's funny. I don't actually call it a paid newsletter. I call it paid resources, which we can get into. But people are more likely to pay for resources than a newsletter, which I discovered, which is interesting. That's called This Is How I Do It. And that has at this point, there's an archive of about 60 or so resources in there, and I publish a new one every week as well.
You publish a new resource every week.
Yes. And that is, each of those are sort of deep dives behind the scenes of how I do something to grow my audience and business. So, pretty much everything I do is help creators grow their audience and business in various ways, whether that's consulting, whether that's showing how I do it, whether that's sharing information and, in my newsletter and that kind of thing.
That's a brilliant turn of phrase, resource, not newsletter. How much revenue have you seen yourself grow by calling your product a resource instead of a newsletter?
Well, I don't have a specific number, but I can say so I launched This Is How I Do It probably a little over a year ago. Almost a year and a half ago. And I think initially I was calling it a paid newsletter. And, like with anything, the messaging is always sort of a work in progress. And I started to notice that as I would experiment at promoting it in my free newsletter, I was always sort of tweaking the copy and what happens when I do this. And I don't have specific numbers, but I noticed when I refer to these things as resources, it converted better. And I think there was a perception of value that people believed their quote unquote resource was more valuable than a newsletter. The other thing is, to be honest, so each of these resources, they're evergreen, they're timeless for the most part. So it actually, in a lot of ways, is a more accurate description than it's not I'm not sharing news, I'm not sharing here's what happened. Uh, and as time went on, certainly as it went on, like when someone joins now and I offer there's two ways I sell it. So you can get an annual subscription. Right now, that's $120 a year. Or I make select individual issues from my archive available for single purchase for $15. So I don't even offer a monthly subscription anymore. So it's annual, or if you want to sample it, you can buy one of those individual issues. Um, so again, that too is a very sort of resource dynamic. So when someone's buying now, they're not just getting everything I share for the next year, they're getting the 60 resources that are already in there. And I think that's very different than the typical paid newsletter, which, depending on sort of what they're covering, like their archive may not be that valuable, right? Like
Right.
I also like the term resource because I think it's more timeless. It suggests that what you're paying for is sort of this collection of information as much as you're paying for the new stuff.
And did you get that idea from somebody, or did you just, was it like a flash of inspiration? Like, let me experiment with this.
Yeah, I mean, it just sort of came to me as I experimented and stuff evolved. The one thing with everything I do, my free newsletter as well, like I'm very focused on creating sort of evergreen, long-term valuable content in everything that I do. I don't cover, my newsletter is not going to cover, here's a new Twitter feature, Facebook announced this. Like, I don't cover news. I want everything that I create to have a longer window of value. So that, and again, that's true in free and paid products. So as a result, this is how I do it. The paid product has been way more, it just continues to get more and more valuable because I'm building up this archive and content library, which is really different than I think how a lot of people think about certainly media businesses, where they're like, what's in the news today? And they have,
Hmm.
if I cover, I saw Twitter today, I think, rolling out like tips functionality. If I do a thing about Twitter rolling out tips, that's fine, but that's valuable for maybe a week, a couple
Hmm.
weeks, a couple months at most. If I do instead do a thing about the underlying principles of how to turn Twitter followers into customers, for example, that's likely going to be valuable for years, right?
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
and my background, I've been a full-time consultant for over 5 years now, but before that, I've worked in a variety of jobs in, marketing and media and entertainment. So I have sort of a Hollywood background, and I think what a lot of people, I think not purposefully, but I now have realized that I've sort of adapted some of that. Like, the real value in Hollywood is in the content libraries. It's not the new stuff. It's the intellectual property and it's the libraries, right? Think about how much money The Office has made after they stopped making episodes of The Office, right? These timeless assets are massive. And if you compare that to, let's just say hypothetically, like a news broadcast, there's not a lot of value in an episode of the nightly news from a month ago.
You can't sell yesterday's hotel room tomorrow.
Right, exactly. So I think that approach of understanding that when you do things that are relatively evergreen or timeless, the return on investment, when I have blog posts that I wrote 5 years ago that get me new clients today. The
Yeah.
value of that time spent creating just compounds over time. And it's, I'm always amazed. Again, you can't do it with everything, but I'm amazed that people choose to invest in things that have a very short value span. Doesn't seem like the best use of time to me.
Yeah. Well, I was just thinking in terms of SEO, it's like people aren't searching for yesterday's news, but they are
Yep.
searching for evergreen resources. So by investing your time on the front end to something that's going to have lasting value, you create it once and it can pay dividends in perpetuity. So it's a very
Yeah.
smart strategy. You're a creator's creator. Talk about your audience for a second.
So my audience, I use the term creator sort of very broadly. It's not i- my audience, I tend to focus more on sort of what I would call sort of independent creators or individual creators. I'm not, and this is true of my consulting as well. Like, a lot of what I share may be relevant to big companies or big brands who are trying to figure out social strategies or how to use newsletters. but I'm really more focused on sort of the individual creator. Um, and my audience spans all of that, right? I have people who work at studios, and then I have people who are, into comedians or writers or trying to write a novel or whatever. But I'm more focused on, like anybody, I'm sort of focused on helping, there's the thing where I always sort of talk to people about target audience. And I think a lot of times, your target audience is the person you were a few years ago. So for me, my audience is people who want to use their creativity to sort of build independent businesses and make a living at it. And that takes all different, there's a big difference between a comedian and an entrepreneur, let's say.
Hmm.
Although the entrepreneur, to be successful, needs to learn how to be more creative, and the comedian needs to learn how to be more entrepreneurial. So I'm sort of somewhere in the middle of that kind of art and business spectrum, helping people on each side try to figure out how to do the other. But it definitely skews individual, independent people as opposed to sort of bigger companies.
I love what you just said, that your audience is who you were a few years ago.
Yeah.
I was checking out your tweets and your Medium posts. Do you want to talk about how you actually do the hands-on consulting? You said, I'm paraphrasing here, but basically that creativity is addition by subtraction, and that constraint is really central to delivering the maximum value. So, how do you actually get somebody to go through that journey of deciding and committing to doing one thing and doing that one thing well?
Yeah, I mean, I think it depends a little bit on who the person is and what their goals are and what they're trying to do. But in general, I think what I help people with a lot is clarity.
You have clarity calls, right?
Yeah, well, it's funny because I was tweeting about that the other day. And, there are typically when I work with clients, so what I don't do is,
So, you don't do newsletters, you do resources, and you don't do consulting, you do clarity calls.
right. Well, I do consulting also, but even the consulting, like, I am not I'm not interested in building an agency, a company, like that kind of thing. So I can only work with so many people because it's just sort of me. It's from a consulting perspective. So what I like to do is I have not been, I don't do social media management. I'm much more on a strategic level than, I'm going to help you figure out how to do this. I'm not necessarily going to do it for you. So typically when I work with clients, it's one of two things. It's kind of a one-off consulting coaching call, or it's a sort of usually 1 to 2 month sort of, I'm going to help you develop a full strategic plan and start to implement it, right? So those are kind of the two ways I typically work with clients. And those coaching calls, which initially were a little bit like, hey, let's get on the phone and we'll talk about whatever problems you have and I'll give you some suggestions and feedback, they were a little sort of free form. Within the past few months, I've sort of come up with this framework that has been super effective. And that's what I'm calling these creator clarity calls. And basically, I take people through this framework, and I've realized that the most important thing you can have to succeed is you really need to be clear on what your goal is, who you need to reach to accomplish it, and sort of how you're going to do that. And so on these calls, which they're 90-minute calls, and I take people through this framework, and they come out at the end with clarity about all these things, including what content they're going to create, what they're, which it all leads into, this is what really my goal is. This is who I need to reach to accomplish it. This is what those people want. This is how I can provide value to them. This becomes my messaging, my products, my services, my content. It all aligns to sort of these things. So they come out with clarity and alignment and sort of a plan of, because one of the things I found is a lot of creators, they're just not sure. They have general or vague ideas about what they want to do or who they want to serve or how they want to monetize, or but they're not sure, right? And so I think the value of this and why I've sort of zeroed in on this clarity piece is because once you have that, it makes everything else easier. Like, it's still hard, right? It's not, you still have to put in the work and you have to create the content and you have to do the sales and make products and build an audience and do all of those things. But those things are almost impossible if you're not clear and strategic about what you're trying to do. And just as importantly, what you're not trying to do,
And it
right?
sounds like you're trying to boil it down into one sentence for the creator,
Yeah.
right?
So right. So basically it's, we wind up with one sentence of a goal, one sentence of who your ideal audience is, and then a series of one sentences about what that audience wants. Typically, I tend to call them sort of specific wants, but you wind up with basically 6 to 9 sentences, right? And, what I say to people is then, that is your guide point, your filter, your everything. Everything you're doing is designed to address and answer one or more of these wants. And if you're creating or doing something that doesn't, you've made a wrong turn somewhere, right? Or your goal or the other stuff is wrong. But so that's really powerful because it gives people, not only does it give them a filter, but it helps them generate content ideas. It helps them generate product and service ideas. It helps them understand. They're able to look at that and go, let me go look at my website or how I'm positioning my newsletter or how I'm, talking about this product. Like, is your messaging matching those wants? Because if it's not, you're off, right? And
Right.
so,
It tells you what not to do, right? And that's
yeah.
more important than what to do because there's 99.9% of life is not doing things.
Yeah, and along those lines, like one of the things I always say to people is, when I have conversations with people and they're frustrated about like, oh, I'm struggling to grow my audience or this or that. I'm like, look, you know, you have one of two problems. I guarantee you.
Mm.
You're either doing too much or you're doing too little,
Mm-hmm.
right? Every creator who's struggling to grow an audience is in one of those camps. You're spread too thin. You're using 6 social platforms when you should use one, or you're not doing enough, right? You have a newsletter that you publish once every 6 months. You have a blog post, like you're not actually putting yourself out there. And what's amazing is when I say that to people, they, without even digging into it, I'll sort of say that and I'll say, which of these do you think is your problem? And they know instantly.
Mm-hmm.
And it's kind of half and half, right? But there's definitely people that they're like, I know, like, how is this going to grow? How am I going to grow my YouTube channel when I'm making one video every 3 months? Like, it's just not going to happen,
They just
right?
need to say it out loud to hear it.
Right. And, and maybe, again, I don't know what the percentages are, but maybe even more so, at least with the people I talk to, because, they're, a lot of them are doing too much and they sort of they feel like they have to do everything and be everywhere and use all the, use all these platforms. Like the social media platform one is like, is like maybe the most common version of that, because they go, oh, I need to be on TikTok and I need to be on Instagram and I need to do this. And there's opportunities on LinkedIn and I should do a podcast. And, and all of those things are opportunities. But like what I always say to them is, you know, if you it takes a lot of time and effort to succeed on any one of these platforms.
Mm-hmm.
So all the time that you're spending on another platform, like you're just less likely to succeed. Like me, I used to use
Yeah.
multiple
You
platforms.
can suck at 6 things or you can be really good at
Right. Like
one.
if you just compiled all that into one platform and they go, yeah, but what about all the, the stuff, the people that are there and whatever. And I was like, you know, do you really think, like, let's say you're using Twitter and you're also using Instagram and blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, but I can't not use Instagram. It's the
Yeah,
hot
you
thing. It's
yeah, you
whatever. And I'm like,
can. Yeah, you
right. How do
can.
I not use TikTok? And I'm like, do you really think there's not enough people on Twitter for you to build the successful thing you want to build? Because that's what you're saying. Like
Right,
when you're like,
right.
I have to be over here and here and there,
Right.
you're suggesting there are more than enough people on any one platform for you to build it,
Totally. Totally.
right?
You know Blair Enns?
Yes. I don't know him personally, but I know of.
Win Without Pitching Manifesto. He had a great interview where he said basically that is that as an entrepreneur, and if we just substitute creator for entrepreneur creator,
Yep.
Creator entrepreneur, uh, we always want to see what's behind the next door.
Yep.
And success is the process of choosing that one door. And then as soon as you go through that one door to the exclusion of all the others, you find out that there's more doors behind that one, and you'll never be able to open all the doors behind the one that you choose.
Yeah.
You'll never be able to run out of ways to use Twitter or YouTube or LinkedIn. And is that kind of what you're telling
Yeah, and it's,
people?
and look, it's hard to do, right? Especially for me who's like sort of, I see all of this stuff, right?
Hmm.
I know, I shouldn't say I know, but I truly believe I could launch a podcast that would be really successful.
Hmm.
And I have for years thought about doing so. I've even recorded some episodes. Like, I haven't pulled the trigger ultimately because it's like I can only do so much. And if I'm going to do that, this is another thing that I've learned in general is like, if you're going to add something on or do something new, something else has to go.
Sure.
You can't just keep adding. And I remember, and I forget where I heard it from, but I remember somebody talking about this, and they were actually talking about it even like in a corporate environment, right? And they were like, anytime your department adds a meeting, that's fine, but they need to remove one,
Hmm.
right? Like otherwise you just can't keep adding on. So while I see opportunities on podcasts, while I'd like to do it, I haven't done it because at the end of the day, I can only do so much. And I'm like, well, I don't want to get rid of this newsletter or that, like, where am I going to make the time for it? And so it's just sort of on the back burner. But I think a lot of people fall victim to feeling like they have to do everything. And that's why, like, when I have this conversation with them and I'm like, look, you're either doing too much or doing too little, especially on the doing too much side, like, they're sort of relieved to have someone, it's nice advice to get to have someone say, like, do less,
Hmm.
right?
Hmm.
Like, get rid
Totally.
of some of this stuff and things will get better. I mean, again, my Twitter took off when I stopped using the other stuff because that time was reinvested into Twitter. And it's not just the time, but it's also the focus of messaging,
Sure.
right?
Sure.
You'll see people who let's say you have a newsletter and someone signs up for your newsletter and then they get their welcome email and you're like, follow me on Twitter and Instagram and LinkedIn and TikTok and it's like
Hmm.
they don't do anything, right? Versus follow me on Twitter. They still might not do it, but you've got a much better
Right.
shot
Right.
of sort of again, this goes back to clarity, right? The fewer things you're doing, the more you're able to sort of focus your messaging and say, go here, connect with me
Yeah.
here, do this. It just simplifies everything.
I heard, I think it was build one, grow the others, uh, applied, or it was something to that effect of, grow an audience here and use the other ones. And, there's algorithms that dictate success on any of those platforms.
Yeah.
So if you're just, I mean, and you're the expert, not me, but it's like, if you know specifically that your audience is hanging out here and you're really deeply engaging with them, but the content is working, then you can just fluff the algorithm for a different platform and not really be concerned about, like having to deeply engage across all these other platforms. You can just be everywhere without having to spread yourself thin if you know that your audience is in one place.
Yeah. And the other piece of this too is, and this gets into sort of a different topic, but like I'm huge I'm huge on repurposing of content and also, most people don't get nearly the value they should out of the content they create. So, and again, this goes a little bit back to maybe some of my Hollywood background and you think about intellectual property, right? So, Disney makes a movie and those characters it becomes theme park rides, it becomes merchandise, it becomes soundtrack albums, it becomes spin-off TV shows, it becomes spin-off Disney Plus shows.
Disney on Ice.
Right, like, they understand that, the movie may be the initial creation, but it's the underlying ideas and intellectual property that are the value, and they continue to use them in a million different ways, right? So, I'm the same way, like, if I write a blog post or not if, but every blog post I write is not only going to be a blog post that is evergreen and can be used, whatever, the underlying ideas, the quote unquote intellectual property within that blog post, I'm going to turn into multiple tweets. I'm going to turn into things I say to consultants or things I say to clients. I'm gonna leverage in all sorts of different ways. I'm gonna share it in my newsletter. I might use it as an intro in my newsletter. Like all of that stuff, and it becomes this, and vice versa, right? So things that I say to, we're recording this. When this is done, I will listen to it, or someone who works with me will listen to it, and I will pull out things and be like, "Oh, that thing I said, that should be a tweet." Oh, and then I'll post it on Twitter and maybe it'll do well. I'll be like, "Oh, maybe that should be a bigger blog post. Oh, maybe that should be a this. Maybe I should put it in my newsletter." And not just once initially, but when it works, I repurpose tweets all the time. Like if I post something today that does well, you're going to see it again 3 months from now. And,
Totally.
and again, and it's going to resurface here, and I'm going to repackage things in interesting ways. And so most people do not do that. Most people create a thing, they share it once or twice, and that's it.
Yeah. What I talk about with, because I serve clients too. And when I talk to them about content, I talk about the Thanksgiving turkey strategy. So it's like you have the big turkey on Thanksgiving,
Right.
you eat what you can eat, and then, you slice it up for sandwiches, you make turkey
Mhm.
soup, you have leftover stuffing. So then you have that big bird and it can be repurposed a lot of different ways.
Yeah. And so, again, I think most people, or a lot of people don't, a lot of creators don't take advantage of that, and they don't think that way. And so as a result, that's what leads in part to some of the overwhelm of, how do I create all this content? How do I whatever? And I think, and this is another sort of side note, but there's people have a lot of assumptions about the way things need to be done, right? So, I an example I use a lot is, I was talking to someone who is a comedian, and we were talking about, I'm huge obviously on newsletters and email lists, and I think everyone, like, it's way more valuable than a social media following or whatever. So I was talking to him and I was like, look, like, you need to grow your email list, you need a newsletter to do that, and it can't just be like promoting your shows. It needs to be something that provides value to people. And, he was like, look, I get it, because you need a direct connection to your audience. And he was like, I get it, but I don't want to write a newsletter. I certainly don't want to write one every week. Like, it feels like a lot of work. And he's like, I'm not saying you're wrong. I know I need this, but like, I don't want, that's not what I want to create. And I said, I get it, but I think you have assumptions about what a newsletter is or has to be that are not true.
Mm.
A
Hmm.
newsletter, I said to him, I was like, all you need is, you need a reason for someone to give you their email address that involves them getting something valuable from you on a
A
regular
resource.
basis. Right. And I was like, your quote unquote newsletter could literally be one sentence. I was like, your audience thinks you're hilarious. They're interested in what you find hilarious. Once a week, you could email one sentence that's like, hey, this is the funniest thing I saw this week. And
Yeah.
as long as it's funny and good, they will love it. And they will love it in part because it's so short. I know you don't want to write a whole thing. A newsletter doesn't have to be a whole thing. They don't really want to read a whole thing, right? So I said versions of this for like the past couple years to various clients of like, a newsletter can be totally different than what you think, as long as it just provides value. It doesn't have to be this big project, right?
Yeah.
And I was like, it could be, I bet a one sentence newsletter would do great. And after saying this over and over again, I was like, all right, I'm going to do an experiment, and I'm going to put my money where my mouth is, and let's see if I'm right. And instead of a sentence, I gave myself a paragraph, and I started this sort of separate newsletter called the Daily Graph. And it was, every weekday I sent one paragraph, sometimes with a link, sometimes it was just a sort of observation or tip or whatever. And I promoted it on my main newsletter, and which has about 18,000 subscribers, and I got like 1,000 of them subscribed initially, and they loved it. Like, huge open rates, huge click rates. It was easy for me to write, because I was also worried about the grind of like every day sending
Yeah.
a
Yeah.
thing. But because
Hmm.
it was so simple, I was able to schedule like a month in advance. I didn't feel any pressure of like having to come up with stuff, and it worked really well. And I was growing it, and it got to about 2,000 subscribers, and I got to this point where I was like, all right, well, this thing really works. People really like it. I have 2,000 people getting this thing. I have 18,000 people getting my weekly. I know the 18,000 would like this. It's just tough to get people to actually check it out. I was like, I can try to like grow this thing, or I can flip a switch and just merge them and be like, now my weekly is also this weekday one paragraph thing. And that's what I did a couple months ago. And it's been great. People love it. Uh, it is to the bigger picture, like, and I use the newsletter as an example, but I think it's true of YouTube videos or Twitter. It's true of everything, right? These assumptions that there's a way it has to be done
Hmm.
and that it involves X amount of work. Like, it's just not true. All it has to be is valuable to people.
Yeah.
And once you realize that, it frees you up to, I think frees people up to go, oh, man, like I think anyone that's using, for example, if you're tweeting once a day, you could have a newsletter.
Could be just the length of a tweet, right?
Yep. It's just a way that instead of the algorithm, everyone's actually going to get it. Now, if your tweets aren't good, that's a different story. But yeah.
Sure, sure. Yeah. Speaking of assumptions and money, I'm assuming that one of the difficult parts of your job is actually having uncomfortable conversations about money with creator clients. And my assumption is that they feel that they have to grind and struggle, and that the part of that they've chosen a life of grind, and that they shouldn't, that there's a ceiling on how much money they could make. Do you encounter that in your work, where people don't really have a confidence around the money part, and that part of what you have to do is help them see just how profitable they could be?
Yeah, I mean, I would say, well, so money is definitely a piece of it, but I think everybody's sort of relationship to monetization is that like they all sort of have their own unique issues around it. So there are definitely people that there's definitely I don't know how to get from here to there, right? Like, how am I ever gonna monetize? I want to leave my day job, but I need to make X amount, and how I'm not making anything right now, and how am I going to do that? So you definitely have those people. Then you have another set of people who are almost the opposite end of the spectrum, where they're completely unrealistic about how easy or this is. They think it's going to be easy, right? They see everything else and go, oh, I just put up a course. Look at all these people making money on courses. I'll just throw up a course and everybody will buy it. They That's the other end of the spectrum, where like that's not going to happen. Like I've had people, I had a real estate agent come to me and be like, oh, will you help me sell my course? And I was like, okay, but do you have any audience? No. Well, do you want to start with like putting content out and like building an audience? No. I'm like, you think people who don't know you exist are just going to randomly buy your real estate
Right.
course? And it didn't really work. Shouldn't I think he was surprised. He shouldn't have been surprised, because he tried to like go to like step 10 without doing steps 1 through 9. So you have people on that end of the spectrum. Uh, then you have the other piece with the money thing is pricing and value. People are all over the map. Most people dramatically underprice, based on their own sort of especially when they're starting out, based on their own insecurity, or they pick prices just based on, it seems like most people charge $5 a month or $10 a month for their thing. Um, Again, they get focused on what the thing is versus the value it provides. How could I charge $50 for an ebook? Well, if your ebook's actually good and it's going to help people make $5,000, $50 is cheap.
Is nothing. Yeah.
Right, like, but they're in the mindset of like, it's only an ebook and people can get, quote unquote real books for $25, and how could so I think there's the money thing is complicated. And everyone's sort of in a different position. I was talking to someone the other day who has an academic background, in sort of English and writing, and is sort of an expert in persuasive writing. And she wants to start getting people to hire her as a speechwriter, basically, speeches and presentations and that kind of stuff. And we were talking actually about not pricing, but we were talking about content. And I was like, okay, well, you need to put content out there that is basically like how to write persuasive speeches. Like you want to address the things of the people that you want to hire you. And she was like, but I haven't done a lot of speech writing. And I was like, yeah, but I'm not telling you to say like, hey, here's my advice as an expert speechwriter who's written a million speeches, but you are an expert in persuasive writing. So, as an expert in persuasive writing, here's how I think you can apply what I know to your speeches. But so that gets into the money thing. There's a lot of people that are going after whatever it is, client sales, but their own insecurities or imposter syndrome is obviously huge. Of like, well, yeah, I want this thing, but who's going to pay me for that? Like, am I what especially when they're starting out, like what qualifications do I have? And as a result, they undercharge or they're hesitant. I see one of the things I point out all the time is like, the word aspiring drives me crazy. Like when I see in like people's bios, like aspiring writer,
Hmm.
do you write? Yeah. Like, do you publish blog posts? Yeah. So you're a writer. Like, you're not an like when you say I'm an aspiring this, aspiring that, you're just telling people, like you're sinking yourself before you even start. Right.
Hmm.
We're living in a world, and this is why I like working with creators, and I am one myself, and I'm so sort of excited about this space in general, is that like, the gatekeepers are gone. You don't need someone to say, you're a writer because I'm giving you a book deal or I'm hiring you to do whatever. Like if you write and you put stuff out there, you're a writer. Like say it, own it.
Yeah, Stripe says you're a writer, not somebody's paying you. Yeah.
Yeah, like and because if you don't, and I'm not saying to like, I'm never, I would never tell anyone to sort of lie about their level of experience or whatever, but you don't, and again, to each their own, everybody like does it their own way and learns their own way. But like, I laugh when I see people going like, oh, I need to go get a social media certificate of like, I need to take this thing to, oh, I'm a certified social media manager. Like, that's just your own insecurity. Like, you either have the skills and you've learned to do it, or you haven't.
Or you have the chutzpah to just get out there and do it.
Right, right. Like, and again, like, I'm not saying learning is great and take all the courses you want and all of I'm not saying not to get the education, but the idea that you need somebody to give you permission to do, I have a thing that I had written an article about this at some point, but like, you don't need to wait for someone to give you your dream job to start doing your dream job,
Hmm.
whatever it is. Like, start doing the thing you want to do. Like, if you want to be a writer, right? You don't need a book deal. You don't need whatever. Same thing was, same, and it goes true for everything, right? Like, if you want to be a marketer, go market something. Like,
Yes.
even if you have to do it for free, like, you don't need someone to hire you to do that thing, right? If you wanna give it if you wanna give investment advice or whatever, like, go offer free advice to someone, and if it
Yeah.
works, like, you're on your way. Um, but I think there's definitely a lot of insecurity. There's also a lot of confusion, both in terms of I don't know how anybody does this. This seems impossible. And then on the other end of like, oh, it seems so easy. Everybody's a creator and making money, and I'll just go do this. And again, I think there's, for me, so I'm 46 years old. So I was, you know, a decade into a career before social media was around. So I have a whole other perspective, I think, than a lot of people in this space because I understand what it's like to create and market things in a sort of pre social media world. But I also, my first blog was in like 1999 or 2000. Like I also understand the sort of social media landscape. So I think the combination of those two things, I see a lot of people that are maybe older than me that don't quite get the social media stuff. And then I say people that are younger than me that like came out of college and their first job was like running some Twitter account, but they have no concept of like
Marketing.
right,
Yeah.
no concept of sort of marketing or business outside of that. So
Yeah. Yeah. Well, let's stay on the money topic if we can,
yes.
because this is the Creator Business Show, kind of like Can you talk about how you get someone to understand their earning potential? There's, like you said, you don't need to wait for someone to give you your dream job. But on the other hand, people don't have the confidence necessarily to choose themselves. So it's like, can you talk about either, you don't have to name names, but like how you helped a client see, like, I could actually be making 3x what I'm making, or just that journey to monetization, and like how you help people identify the opportunities to make the maximum amount from their
Yeah.
creativity?
So the first thing I would say is that both audience growth and monetization is always rooted in providing specific value to a specific group of people, right? So that's the first thing. You need to figure out, who are you going to help and how are you going to help them? And when I say that to people, when I talk about value and they go, well, how do you define, or how do I know what's valuable, right? And to me, value is transformation. So it's someone who's at point A and wants to get to point B, and your content or product or service or whatever you're going to charge for helps them make that transformation. So the first thing to do is get really clear on what that is, right? I want to help these people get from here to there, and that bridge is how you're ultimately going to monetize. If there's not transformation, it's probably not valuable, and it's probably going to be extremely difficult for you to monetize. So I always talk about, and I see this especially with like content creators, they a lot of times aim for interesting
Mm,
as opposed to valuable.
mm,
Interesting's fine. Interesting's difficult to monetize,
mm-hmm.
right? Interesting is, oh, that was a, interesting blog post about this, an interesting video. But if it's not helping them transform, if it's not helping them get from point A to point B, they're probably not going to pay for it.
Got it.
So
Got it.
once you get clear on that, now the question is, how valuable financially is that transformation for people, right? And now this depends a lot on who you're helping and what you're helping them do. And, so that can be all sorts of things. But from a straight sort of monetization standpoint, and so then once you start to think about that, you also get into, I have a blog post, and of course I won't remember all the questions now, but I have a blog post about like 6 questions to consider before you try to monetize something, right? And so one of them is like, are you selling to people who know they have a problem or don't, right? Massive difference. Either can work, huge difference, right? You have to convince people that they have a problem that you're going to help them solve,
Mhm.
or are they already out there going, I got a problem, I need a solution for this. Another one is, really thinking about, do you want to build a business where you're selling to, you're charging a high price to a few people? Or, like I think the example I use is like, are you selling a $10 product to 1,000 people, $100 product to 100 people? I get screw up the math now. a
$10,000
thousand dollar
product. Yeah.
product to 10 people,
Mhm.
whatever, right?
Yeah.
Like those, and again, anything can work, but those choices are going to completely shift your approach to products and services and audience growth and who you need, right? People get hung up on reach and followers. Well, if you're selling a high priced product and you only need a few people, you don't need a lot of followers.
You
You
just
don't
need
need a lot of,
patience, you know?
right. You don't need, but your positioning needs to attract those people. You don't want to attract $10 buyers when you have $1,000 product.
Yeah. That's really interesting too, because there's actually really good business content. There's really good advice on TikTok. And there's obviously hundreds of
Yeah.
millions of people on TikTok. But finding that $10,000 service buyer on TikTok is not impossible, but your odds are very low. I was
Yeah.
actually watching a copywriter have a really good conversation about levels of awareness of your buyer, and someone just you know role playing with himself about, if your buyer already knows they have a problem, then this is how you talk to them. It's like, that's great, that video got 400,000 views or something like that, but it's like, did that actually convert into any copywriting clients for him? Probably not.
Yeah, and so I think to sort of give you a specific example, so there's a client I'm working with now who has a free newsletter that is it helps uh, people who speak they're not Chinese natives, but they speak Chinese as sort of a second language, or they do business in China. So like they already are sort of probably intermediate to advanced level Chinese speakers, but they want to both sort of practice and keep up to date with new slang and understand how to better communicate in Chinese with Chinese business culture, etc. Right. So his newsletter's about that. It's great, sort of niche audience. It's free newsletter. Built it's going well. And so when I started working with him, part of what we were doing is talking about like, all right, well, how do we figure out how do I monetize this, right? And so I think when we started, his initial thought was what most people's, he's on Substack. His initial thought was what most people do is like, oh, I create a paid version, and they'll people who pay will, pay $5, $10 a month, whatever, will get extra issues, or that, this, and that. And one of the things, especially with paid newsletters, that I say in terms of monetization is, you know, people they don't pay for more, they pay for different.
Mm.
That this idea, and it's how most people approach it. And I think it's why most of these paid newsletters fail. Even if they love your newsletter, they probably don't want another issue a week, or like they just don't. What they'll pay for, and this is what I did with This Is How I Do It, and that's totally different. It's related, but it's totally different than what goes in my newsletter, my free newsletter, right?
Hmm.
I was like, let's start with that, and let's sort of go through, what could you sell that's different? Your newsletter is drawing them in. Now let's offer them something different that's maybe more valuable, that helps with that transformation. And we're still figuring out what that is. But for example, maybe they pay for a community where they can talk to each other. Maybe you do a series of interviews with experts. The interviews are in Chinese, so they're listening in Chinese and talking in Chinese, and those people are talking about, I said I was like, bring in a business translator who works in China and have them talk about the communication problems they see from non-Chinese speakers. Like that's really valuable for what these people want, right?
Because they want transformation.
Right. It's that transformation, right? And so I was like, when you start to, think about, or maybe it's, even packaging up some of his existing stuff, like he shares in each issue, like idioms or phrases that have like come into the lexicon. I was like, package up a year's worth of those and sell them as an ebook, like
Hmm.
for people that just joined you. But then on top of that, you want to factor in your audience, right? His audience, for the most part, has money. Like they're professionals, they're successful. A lot of them are probably able to expense it, so their business is
Oh,
paying.
sure.
So
Yeah.
like when you get into the monetization, as opposed to, let's think about this the way everyone does their Substack, and it's a $10 whatever. Maybe it's not. Maybe it's this video slash community. And you can charge a lot more, right? So that's an example of sort of how I work with people, and sort of how I think I encourage creators to sort of think about monetization, as opposed to just like, well, I guess I'll do this because this is the way everybody does it.
So your approach is really transformation from money.
Yes. Yeah. Because I think that's where the real value is. Yes, you can make money from, interesting or inspiring or entertaining or whatever. But I think if
Hmm.
you're talking about real money, in most cases people want transformation. The other thing is, if you go the other route, right, if you're not doing transformation and you're like, look, I just want to tell really interesting stories, right, or I just want to, make funny videos, something like that, right? If you're doing that, you need to understand that when you're in the entertainment or interesting space, you're now competing with Netflix and Hulu and Chris Rock and the world's biggest YouTubers and
Hmm.
all of that, right? For interesting. When you're in transformation, you're only competing with people who are offering that same transformation. And if you get sort of niche and specific enough, you may even find a space where you're not really competing with anybody.
Hmm. Yeah. I mean, even in that instance, really competing with yourself because
Yeah.
most people do nothing, you know?
Yeah.
Uh, I mean, I got a, I got an advertisement from Tony Robbins in my email today, and I'm just like, like broadly speaking, I'm an entrepreneur, so he has something to say to me, but really, it's like he's not going to address any problem that I specifically have. Whereas I could actually talk to you and get a transformation
Yep.
or get a reframe on a problem that I actually am grappling with.
And by the way, like this is all stuff that for me, like I'm learning and evolving as I go. Like, I literally just this week started labeling like that consulting thing as this creator clarity call, right? Because it was a step further to, now that I have this framework and I've been doing it, I'm like, wow, this works really well. Why
Hmm.
don't I present it as that? Again, in terms of transformation, like even if you think about how I talked about it, had we done this call 3 months ago, I would have been like, yeah, I do coaching calls and we talk about whatever they need help with and blah, blah,
Sure.
blah, blah, blah. Right. Versus people that are trying to figure out, trying to get clarity on like my goal, my audience, my content, my marketing, my products, services.
Right.
That's what we're gonna do. Like I'm gonna
Sure.
take you from you're not sure to here's exactly what you can follow. That is way, and by the way, like I have raised my prices accordingly
Sure.
because it's a clearer transformation. It's no longer, what a lot of people do with coaching calls, which is like, hey, you can pick my brain. Like, okay. And by the way, that can be helpful too.
Yeah.
And people will buy that too. But I think it's better both for me and for the people to go, no, I'm gonna get you from here to here, point A to point B.
There is something that occurs to me that you were talking about earlier, where someone said that they want to be a speech writing consultant and they haven't written a million speeches. But like you said, you, Josh, are growing and experimenting and having the humility to say, I don't know everything, but this is what I do know. And I guarantee you there's a lot of things that I do know, even if I don't know everything, that you, as the recipient of transformation, don't know and want to know. And that
Yeah.
authenticity really binds me to somebody when they say, I do know a lot and I also don't know a lot. So, as opposed to someone who says, I know everything and I'm inflexible and I'm not open to new knowledge. So, I think that's an important part of the positioning or just the reframing for somebody who wants to get out there and do more. Is it's like, no, you don't have to know everything, but can you guide someone to that transformation?
Yeah. And it's sharing with, everything I don't know or that hasn't worked or that I haven't figured out yet are all opportunities.
Hmm.
Because if at some point I figure it out, I can turn around and teach it or sell it or whatever. So I think a lot of people go, I don't know how to do this. And in the moment, and look, there's things I may never figure out, right? Like there are things that I've been doing consulting for 5 years and, 6 months ago, I stumbled into this framework, right? But
Right.
if you're constantly doing and trying and not going like, oh, well, I don't know how to do that or I can't do that. So I guess that's just not for me, those are opportunities, right? Like, again, my newsletter ultimately going daily, which was never the plan, is a perfect example, right? I kept saying I'm gonna, try this, oh, you got a daily would work, a daily would work, a daily, whatever. And then I'm like, all right, let me try it. And then it worked. And now I've sort of figured it out. And what's fascinating is I have people coming to me and going like, now I'm thinking about, I love I'm thinking
Yeah.
about doing that, right?
The Chinese idiom of the day could be a really easy way to do a, one
Yeah.
paragraph.
But that process, too many people, it's too easy to, I don't want to say give up, but it's too easy to sort of write off the things that they haven't figured out. And especially, to bring it back to monetization, you know, look, it takes time. Like you're not gonna, most likely you are not going to just flip a switch and it's going to work, right? Like you're not going to suddenly be like, all right, now I'm rich. Like
Hmm.
you're going to have to iterate, and some products are going to work and some aren't, and you're going to sort of figure it out as you go. And that's a part of it. That's a big part of it too.
Yeah. There was a tweet that you shared that I really liked, and it was, doing successful.
Oh, it was not, yeah, it was, I
Yeah.
just did it last night, actually. People seem to really like that one. I think it was, "This is what progress feels like," and it was nothing, 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 something.
Yes. Exactly.
And yeah, I
Exactly.
think it's very, I'm not surprised it resonated with people.
Yeah.
It was one of those that I posted, I was like, "I have a hunch people are gonna relate to this."
Yeah. Well, that is really one of the most critical things and is so hard to do as a human being, and then living in capitalism where we see, what we perceive to be an overnight success, is that to get to a level of fluidity and earning potential and everything, you do have to have patience. And it can be really difficult if you want to quit your job, if you are trying to get your first job, um, to be able to devote, 6 months to something, because it doesn't, in hindsight, 6 months is no time at all when you really hit your stride. But to think, okay, I'm going to do this 180 days, is seems in our human mind like quite a bit of time.
Well, I also think, and I have a post about this that, I think the post is called, like, "Only do it if you're willing to do it 100 times," um, which sounds intimidating, but when you read the post, it's actually not. It's actually inspiring, I think. So, but basically, and I say this to people all the time. So, when people start things, for my recommendation is you should start it with an output goal, not an outcome goal, right? So I use 100 as an example, but that 100 days could be 100 tweets, it could be 100 hours, it could be 20. It doesn't even have to be 100. But the idea is, pick a thing and go, I'm going to do this X amount of times. Like if I launched a podcast, right? I might go, I'm going to put out 12 episodes of this podcast. I'm going to publish a new one, once a week. And that's my goal. I don't care. It's not about how many people listen to it. It's not about even if I like it. I'm going to do it. And using this as an example, I'm going to post 12 episodes. And at the end, I'm not even going to think about quitting or it's working, it's not working. At the end of 12, I'm going to take a step back and I'm going to go, do I like doing this? Is it working? Do I want to keep doing it? So what happens is a couple things. When people don't approach it that way, from day one, they start thinking about, should I quit?
Hmm.
They're constantly, should I quit? Should I not quit? Is it working? Was this a mistake? The other thing is if they don't have an endpoint, it seems endless, which
Hmm.
also makes them want to quit. Versus, well, I'm only doing 12. I said I'd do 12. At the end of 12, number one, they have a sense of accomplishment, even if nobody listened to it, because
Right.
they're like, I said I was going to do 12, I did 12. Number two, they now, because a lot of times people won't quit because they don't want to feel like a quitter or a failure or whatever. You don't have to feel like that when you only committed to do 12. You
Right.
don't have an endpoint. You're constantly like, well, if I quit, then I told everyone I was going to do this and now I'm going to look like a failure and whatever, right? But so when you do that, it frees you up. It removes all of the pressure of success that a lot of people feel right off the bat, which again is not realistic in most cases, and allows you to just sort of focus on the thing. It allows you to focus on the thing that is completely in your control. I can't control if anyone listens. I can't control if anyone buys. I can't control any of that, but I can control the output,
Yeah.
right? So you have 100% chance of succeeding if that is the way you frame it. And so I again, whatever the number is that you pick, I highly recommend that approach. Not only, I mean, you could argue you have that approach forever, but especially when you're starting something, um, because it just changes the whole dynamic. Because otherwise, I think people are constantly like, literally from like day one, they're like, should I quit? And is this working?
I'm not a billionaire yet.
Yeah, right, exactly. And even again, like it's great to set goals of like, I want to build my audience to this point and I want to, make this much money. And there's nothing wrong with setting those goals, but like those, you're never going to be able to control that.
Yeah, that's why Ship for 30 is
Yeah.
so effective. It's like you commit to 30 days, you're doing it in public, you're doing it
Yep.
with a bunch of other people, and you can write a paragraph for 30 days. Promise you.
Yeah. And ultimately, no matter what happens, right. If people were doing that without that, they would 3 days in go, I don't know if this is working. What's the point? And I found my own experience, like when I do things without setting that sort of clear output, I wind up bailing on them all the time because I'm like, I don't know, like this seemed like a good idea, but maybe not.
Yeah. And this is episode 6 of the Creator Business Show.
Yeah,
And
there you go.
most people when they start their own podcast, and I'm doing this fortunately for Pico, but most people stop after 7. So
Oh, really?
yeah, Pat Flynn, who is also a creator's
Well,
creator.
I'm glad I was booked for episode 6 and not
Yeah, right.
episode 8.
No, this is we have interviews scheduled well into the future, but that output goal as opposed to what do you say? It's the output, not the end point.
Output, not outcome.
Output, not outcome. Yeah, that is like James Clear Atomic Habits. It's just like if you commit to drinking a glass of water at a specific time, then it doesn't matter what it does for you because the result will happen. Yeah. Well, very cool. I could talk to you for quite a bit longer, and I'm really grateful for your time. To recap, one of the important things you talked about was really bringing down the bar for yourself of what it means to produce regular content. If that means that your email newsletter or your resource is really just the funniest thing you heard all week or all day, and that's what your audience is into, then you don't have to overthink and make it a big production. You talked about a specific client who is talking to Chinese speakers who are doing business in China, and that they could just benefit from getting one idiom per week or an annual collection of all the new words that this person learned, and that people are actually willing to pay a lot for value and for transformation. And so if you are offering transformation, you're competing either with very few people or nobody, and focus on the transformation and the money will follow.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's also the transformation piece is also a great filter or check for people because like it's very easy like when I talk to someone and I go like, well, what's the transformation you're helping people make? And if they can't answer that, like it's very illuminating to them of like, oh, well, I just think I share interesting stuff. Okay. But you're expecting people to just pay for interesting stuff. And it's not that no one will. Some people may, but in general, to really build something sort of meaningful and successful, transformation usually has to be a piece of it.
I agree. Yeah, on a personal note, I'm really looking at how to help people transform into the leaders of the future to solve humanity's greatest issues. And so I know that there are plenty of people willing to step up for that. And I do have the ability to be patient.
What's interesting about that is like, and I do this when I talk to people all the time, is like the language and words chosen are so important. So, like, say what you just said again.
Okay, so I want to help specifically startup founders deal with global warming and humanity scale crises through entrepreneurship and become the thought leaders that get the funding and create monumental change in human society.
So, how would you describe your point A and point B? Where are they at right now, and where do they want to be?
So they're a company that is funded, that has a product in market and has a massive, $1 trillion industry. And they are growing a multi-billion dollar company. So they're the CEO of a business juggernaut at the end. And people are coming to them for their perspective, for their product, and because they have a mission. And they're able to articulate what that mission is. It's clear in the product that they're building, and the impact that they're creating is needed in society.
The product is global warming related.
Not necessarily. I mean, it has a value to society, and clearly the most important thing to society is how do we live on a planet that's rapidly warming and becoming inhospitable to human life.
So it's helping them. So their company's in early stage and it's helping them get to the point where they're massive or whatever.
Yeah, it could be an early stage, but it's on a trajectory towards, making a planetary impact. And they're the empathetic leader. So I think what I'm actually struggling with the most is the nomenclature around what kind of leader they are. I'm thinking either inclusive or empathic. So, Elon Musk is an incredible entrepreneur and
Right.
CEO, but he's not the type of leader that I want to cultivate. I want people that have more soft skills and are doing good things.
So give me a specific example, like your ideal client or whatever, custom, whatever would be who? Or not, it doesn't have to be a name, but like it would be
Yeah.
the person that's doing this.
Well, so I was talking to a woman last week, and she's raising a $50 million VC fund for women of color. And, Black women invented call waiting, closed caption, or sorry, CCTV, incredible inventors. So she is, what I pitched to her is that she's at the forefront of $1 trillion movement of value created by Black women CEOs. And so for her positioning is she's raising the money to then invest in these companies that are going to create $1 trillion of value. So broadly, that's my mission too. And I basically gave her that as like $1 trillion of value. So I could even be more specific. I want to help the CEOs that create $1 trillion of value tackling global warming and other planetary scale problems.
So let's use her as a specific example. You want to help her do what?
I want to help her become a leader and communicate her mission and values to the market.
But is she not a leader already?
Well, she is a leader, but then every leader needs help with communication, speech writing, how to really communicate that mission so that people either want to join the company, they want to fund her, or they want to buy. And so it really comes down to three things.
That piece, I think, is what was missing from your description.
Is the buy fund or
What you're the sort of what you're actually going to help her do, right? Because I think you're describing it as like sort of be a better leader, or whatever. But when you start to get into specifics of, I want to help leader these types of leaders, however you define, these types of leaders, better sort of communicate their message. Like when you start naming this, because I think what happens a lot of times is people go like they use sort of they describe what they do in kind of industry jargon, and it's like, okay, but I don't really know what you do or what, like what okay, well, what does that mean? Right.
right?
And then especially like there's one, hold on, let me actually pull it up on Twitter because I was having this conversation with somebody yesterday. So I had asked him his goal, and he goes, I help organizations and individuals become well rounded innovators by using human complexity as an advantage, not a problem to overcome. And when I said to him, I was like, not bad, but I would guess most people don't know what using human complexity as an advantage means without an explanation. I always ask myself, is anyone walking around using this term? I doubt anyone is saying, I wish we could use human complexity as an advantage,
Truly, yeah,
right?
yeah,
So if you think about, and that's why I like drilling down into a specific person because it can help you sort of extrapolate. So if you think about that woman and both, like once you start saying, oh, I'm going to help you be a bigger leader or better leader or whatever, you know what I mean? It's like, okay, I don't know. But
Mhm.
when you go like, I'm going to help you amplify your community, or I forget the three things you said,
Yeah.
but like,
Well, so hiring talent,
right.
getting more investment, and then getting more customers.
So that, but you see what I mean in terms of the clarity? Like now people know, like, okay, I know exactly what that is. And when they know exactly what it is, it allows them to go, well, that's what I'm looking for. Like there are people out there that are going, I need to figure. So again, I'm using her as an example,
Right, right.
right? But even if she existed and didn't know who you were, she very well might be going, I got to figure out how to hire. I got to figure out how to raise more money. And I got to figure out how to do this third thing in order to get from here to here. And then you come along. She's probably not going, I got to figure, I mean, again, different people have different things, right? She's probably not going, I need to figure out how to be a better leader.
Right, right.
Even though those things are part of it, the
Sure.
specifics are like, these are the, like, it'd be very interesting. and I know you've already talked to her, but just hypothetically, right? Someone else in her position, be very interesting to sort of ask them, like, put the transformation question to them. You describe to me, like, not you, but her, right? Like, if I was talking to her, I'd be like, talk to me about where you are, talk to me about where you want to be, and what you think you need to get there. And if you do that with a few people that you think are your sort of typical ideal clients, you'll probably see some things, or they'll say some words that you'll be like, okay, I'm going to use that word. Like, that language will help, and then it sort of resonates. So, like, in your mind, you can sum it up. It's not that it isn't the leadership thing, but it's like you want to use the words that people are looking for, and it makes it more clear. Like I said, like, that guy, the whatever he said, like,
Human
using human
complexity
complexity
and
as an
yeah.
advantage. You may know all that, but like that, nobody's out there looking for that.
Yeah, yeah. Totally, totally. But people are out there looking for their next senior engineer. So
Yeah, right. And I think especially when you're able to describe that sort of specific person with some specificity, right? And the specific thing, now it just starts to become really clear.
yeah, I actually have a pitch deck with that, or not a pitch deck, but
Right.
to prepare people before I have a meeting. So how do people get a hold of you? Like I know that you probably, even if you're not recording your own podcast, you have other commitments today.
Yes. So joshspector.com. fortheinterested.com is my free newsletter. So that's a great place to start. They can sign up there at fortheinterested.com/subscribe. And they're welcome to email me, josh@joshspector.com, or I'm really active on Twitter. That's my one platform, at jspector, JSPECTOR.
And then who would you like to hear from?
Yeah, I mean, creators, again, broadly defined, creator, entrepreneur types. I help all sorts of different people, but especially people that use writing, newsletters, or Twitter to grow their audience and business. I can help an Instagram person, a YouTuber, a podcaster, a small business. But in terms of like sort of my kind of specialty, I guess, newsletters and writing, Twitter as well, is kind of where, and that's because it's sort of what I prefer and what I use. So there's a something there. I can help a YouTuber, but probably going to help you more if you've got a newsletter.
Nice,
And
nice.
I would say that also, even if again, I'm a huge proponent of newsletters. I think everyone should have one. They're algorithm proof, and so whether you have a newsletter or you're thinking of starting a newsletter, yeah, I'm happy to help.
Awesome, awesome. Well, maybe we'll get to do episode, part 2 of this in a few months' time. Josh, thank you so much for telling us all about how to focus in on what you want to do. Also talking about output versus outcome. Really, really important. And then, we did talk about how to atomize what you do so that you're not overwhelming yourself, you're not burning yourself out. So there's a lot of really great topics that we talked about, and it's been a fantastic conversation. So I really thank you very much for joining us today.
Yeah, thanks for having me.